To go live to Melbourne, the chairman of the Joint Parliamentary Intelligence and Security Committee, Dan Tehan, is outlining recommendations for the government's data retention laws.
To the Parliament. The Data Retention Bill will implement a mandatory telecommunications data retention regime. It contains measures to require telecommunications suppliers in Australia to retain certain data for 2 years. The bill limits the organisations able to access telecommunications and stored data to those with a demonstrated need and with appropriate internal procedures to protect privacy, and expands the role of the Commonwealth Ombudsman in overseeing the exercise of these powers. In handing down its report, the committee has made 38 recommendations aimed at strengthening the regime and improving oversight and safeguards. These include putting the proposed data set in the bill rather than in regulations as proposed, limiting all criminal law enforcement agencies and enforcement agencies in legislation, establishing emergency declaration powers subject to safeguards for the Attorney-General to include items in the data set or declare an additional agency able to access data, prohibiting civil litigants with appropriate exceptions from accessing telecommunications data being held solely in compliance with mandatory data retention requirements, strengthening the safeguards around the use of telecommunications data for the purpose of determining the identity of a journalist's sources by requiring agencies to provide a copy to the Commonwealth Ombudsman or the Inspector-General of Intelligence and Security of any authorisation for access to such data. The Ombudsman or IJIS would then be required to notify the committee as soon as practicable and provide a briefing accordingly. A separate review by this committee of safeguards relating to the use of telecommunications data for the purpose of determining journalist sources to be undertaken within 3 months. Additional funding for the Commonwealth Ombudsman commensurate with the office's expanded oversight role, and privacy and data security measures including a mandatory breach notification scheme. The committee has recommended that the government make a substantial contribution to the upfront capital costs incurred by service providers in implementing their data retention obligations. The committee also recommended that, when designing funding arrangements, the government ensure that an appropriate balance is achieved that accounts for significant variations between the services, business models, size and financial positions of different companies. The committee recommended maintaining the proposed 2-year retention period specified in the bill. The committee has carefully considered the evidence presented on the necessity and proportionality of the proposed mandatory data retention regime and has concluded that it is necessary to support our national security and law enforcement capabilities. At the same time, the committee considers that appropriate limits, safeguards and oversight mechanisms must be in place. In a recommendation with particular significance to parliamentary oversight of the data retention regime, the committee has recommended that for the first time it be empowered to inquire into operational matters in the limited area of authorisation in relation to ASIO and the AFP. This recommendation represents a significant step in the evolution of this committee. The committee received more than 200 written submissions from a broad range of sources and heard from 30 organisations over 3 days of public hearings, in addition to private evidence. I would like to thank the Deputy Chair of the committee, Anthony Byrne, and all other members of the committee for their contribution they have made to this bipartisan report. Metadata is central to virtually every counter-terrorism, organised crime and serious criminal investigation. Obviously, I would call on the government to accept the report's 38 recommendations. I would also call on the Parliament to accept the report's 39th recommendation that the bill be passed. I'm happy to take a couple of questions.
How much?
Yes.
Hi, Hannah Francis from The Age. Given that the committee heard 1,000 New South Wales police could authorise metadata access, and the ABC was told by a former police employee he could easily slip his ex-girlfriend's number into an authorisation request, shouldn't there be a bit more oversight here as the pool of data expands?
There is additional oversight in this bill. The 38 recommendations that we have made have specifically meant that there is more oversight. And these recommendations, which are all bipartisan, will ensure that those mechanisms there operate efficiently and effectively, and that the public can be confident that the regime is being used appropriately. Thank you. There are various mechanisms, oversight mechanisms in the bill. The most important one is the increased role of the Ombudsman, and the committee has recommended as well that that come with increased financial resources. Yes.
How much is the initial cost, and what percentage of that is the government going to put into it? And then, as a result of that, how much, I guess, would Australians' bills go up as a result of the companies passing it on?
So the committee took public briefings on the cost of the regime, and also received a confidential briefing from the government around costs. The costs which have been put forward suggest that the regime might vary between roughly $200 million and $400 million to be implemented. The committee has made recommendations to the government of how it should go about trying to work with industry to ensure that the government makes a significant contribution to that cost. We've made recommendations which suggest that they have to take into account size of the provider, and also the types of data systems that they have in place, and make sure that the regime can be flexible so it can deal with the legacy carriers such as Telstra and Optus, and then other smaller providers.
Have you put a dollar figure on it?
No, we haven't put a dollar figure on it. We, as a committee, didn't think that that was the right thing to do. We thought we're better making some recommendations as to how the government should go about it, rather than putting specific dollar figures. That we didn't see that as our role.
It seems that Labor's backed down on a number of points, including that enforcement agencies get court-approved warrants, before they embark on these exercises. Is that correct? And how did you sort of garner those concessions?
Can I say to all members of the committee, both Labor and the Coalition, the spirit of bipartisanship in which this report was produced is something that I haven't seen the like of in my time in the Parliament. It was very beneficial to the final recommendations in this report, and I would congratulate all members of the committee for the way they went about their work. This is an important document. It is an important piece of legislation. It's important that we get this bill through the Parliament, and every member of the committee has worked in a very true bipartisan way in getting these 38 recommendations agreed.
And just one last specific one for me. I understand ASIC and the ACCC, the corporate regulators, at one point weren't going to be included, but they have been included as nominated enforcement agencies that will have these powers. Is that correct?
Look, the committee deliberated on many matters. We took private hearings, we took public hearings. I do not go into the workings of the committee. What is the most important thing is what has been produced by the committee, and these 38 recommendations are significant recommendations, and my view is that they now should give comfort to the community and to the Parliament to pass this bill. Got time for one more.
Correct, is it? Sorry, ASIC and ACCC on that list of enforcement agencies?
So ASIC, we have recommended that ASIC and the ACCC be included. That is correct. One more.
A number of groups who opposed the bill recommended that 6 months was in fact enough to retain metadata, and that 2 years was too long. Why wasn't that recommended?
We took evidence both publicly and privately on this matter, and the evidence was overwhelming that we need a 2-year scheme. There are serious investigations that require that amount of time, and if we had have done anything that was shorter, we could have jeopardised those investigations, and that is why the committee was unanimous on that 2-year retention period. Thank you all for coming today.